There is a specific kind of dread that arrives after a good therapy session, not from the session itself, from what comes next. Ryan had been noticing it for about 2 months. The session would be good, sometimes genuinely good, the kind where something he hadn't been able to put into words finally found its shape and sat there. Real. In the room between him and Dr. Nathan Cross. He would leave feeling lighter. More himself, like a window had been opened somewhere. And then he would drive home, and somewhere between the therapist's office on Franklin Avenue and the apartment on Lyndale, the number would go up on his side of whatever equation he had been running without knowing he was running it. He'd started calling it the counter about 2 months in. Not out loud. Just in his head. Every time the number went up on his side, it went down somewhere in the apartment. He hadn't told Dr. Cross about it yet. He wasn't sure it wasn't his imagination. Tonight it was a Tuesday in September, and the session had been particularly good. He sat in the car for 3 minutes before going inside. Come on, he told himself. It was a good session. That doesn't mean anything is going to... He stopped himself. Unbuckled. Got out. The apartment was quiet when he opened the door. That kind of quiet that isn't really quiet. The kind with a specific weight to it, a texture you learn to read before your brain catches up. Valerie was on the couch, her tablet in her lap, not quite reading. Hey, how was your day? Fine. One word. The tablet screen had gone dark. She hadn't looked up. Ryan put his bag down, got a glass of water, stood at the kitchen counter watching the city out the window. The session had been about his father, mostly. About the way he had learned, very young, to read the temperature of a room before entering it. Dr. Cross had said something that made Ryan go quiet for a long time. That was the moment he'd felt lighter, the window opening. Now he stood in his own kitchen reading the temperature of his own apartment, the way he had learned to read his father's house. 40 minutes later, Valerie put the tablet down. Can I ask you something? Of course. Have you been feeling distant lately? Because I've been having this feeling. I don't know. Like you're somewhere else when you're here. I'm right here. I know you're physically here. It's a feeling I've been having, and I can't tell if it's me or if something's changed. Her voice was even, not angry. The tone of someone trying very hard to communicate something difficult. Ryan turned away from the window. Nothing's changed. I had a long day. I know. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I just feel it sometimes. This distance. And I worry. She picked up the tablet again. The conversation closed. Ryan finished his water, washed the glass, went to the bedroom. He lay there for a long time before sleeping, running the correlation in his head. Good session. Distance in the apartment. Good session. Something's wrong. Good session. She has a feeling. He had been a chemistry teacher for 11 years. He knew what a correlation looked like. He just didn't know yet what to do with this one. He tried the next morning to locate what he'd done wrong. This was a habit he had, something he'd noticed in therapy. The way his first response to tension was always to search himself for the source. The assumption, somewhere below the level of thought, that the fault was inside him rather than outside him. Dr. Cross had called it the forensic impulse, the need to find the evidence that justified other people's discomfort. He went through the previous 48 hours with the same methodical attention he applied to a student's failed experiment. What he'd said, what tone he'd used, whether he'd been present enough or too withdrawn. He couldn't find it. This was, in some ways, worse. He'd been 28 when he met Valerie Hart. She was 31, an HR director at a tech company downtown, and she walked into the school's annual benefit fundraiser, which Ryan attended every year because the biology teacher guilted everyone into it. with the ease of someone who had long since stopped wondering if she belonged. She had asked him what he did. He'd said he was a chemistry teacher. He'd waited for the polite smile, the "oh, how nice," the pivot to something more interesting. Instead, she'd tilted her head. There's something about that makes sense for you. The precision. I can see it. He hadn't known what to do with that. Being seen? Really seen? By someone you'd met 12 minutes ago. She called him 2 days later. She had found his number through the school's general contact line, which should have struck him as something. At the time, it struck him as decisive. The first year was the best year of his adult life. She was brilliant in conversation. Sharp. She had read things he hadn't and could explain them with a clarity that made him feel like the world had more structure than he'd realized. She took him to things. Restaurants he'd never tried, a gallery opening, a film series at the Walker. She had opinions about all of it, but more than any of that, she noticed him. She noticed how he organized his thinking. She noticed when he was tired before he'd said anything. She knew what he would want to eat before he'd looked at the menu. She said early on, "You've been underutilized, in the ways that actually count." He replayed that sentence for weeks. The first correction came 6 months in. He'd had dinner with his 2 closest friends, Marcus and John, guys he'd known since college, who he'd been seeing less of since Valerie. A Thursday after work, at the Lowry near Marcus's place. Nothing remarkable. Beers, catching up, the easy rhythm of people who had known each other long enough not to perform. He came home at 10:30. Valerie was already asleep. The next morning she was quieter than usual. Not cold, exactly. A specific variant of quiet that had a texture to it. Present, but not quite there. Answering questions, but not initiating anything. He'd asked if everything was okay. "I'm fine. I just didn't sleep well." It lasted 3 days. 3 days of that specific quiet. Meals shared in a pleasant, slightly too even silence. And then, on the 4th day, it lifted. She came home with Thai food and a bottle of wine and asked him about a paper one of his students had written that he'd mentioned weeks ago. He felt the relief of it, the warmth returning, and thought, I should have checked in sooner. I left her alone for a whole evening. I could have been more considerate. He declined the next invitation from Marcus. He couldn't have told you at the time that the 2 things were connected. The pattern installed itself quietly over 2 years. It was never dramatic. Nothing that could be named, held up, pointed at, and said, "Look, here, this is what you're doing." It was always just under the surface. A slight drop in temperature when he came back from something. A specific kind of tiredness in her voice after he'd been unavailable. A comment that arrived wrapped in what sounded like vulnerability, but landed like an invoice. He became very good at anticipating it. Not consciously. The way you learn to avoid a creaky step without thinking about it. He stopped going to the gym on Saturday mornings because she seemed unsettled when she woke up alone. He called more than he used to when he was at a work event. Not because she asked him to, but because not calling produced that specific quiet. He started leaving faculty happy hours after 1 drink. He started saying, "I don't really want to," when what he meant was, "I want to, but it will cost something." He told himself this was what being a good partner looked like. He started therapy 5 months ago because he couldn't sleep. That was the honest reason, not the relationship. He wasn't ready to say it was about the relationship. He was sleeping 4-5 hours a night, waking at 2 and 3, running through the day's interactions with the forensic attention of someone looking for where he'd gone wrong. He'd searched Anxiety Therapist Minneapolis on a Tuesday at 2 in the morning and booked an appointment with Dr. Nathan Cross before he could think too carefully about it. He hadn't told Valerie for 5 weeks. The first time he'd slept through the night in 6 months, he called his sister. Sophia taught art at a middle school in St. Paul. She was 3 years younger than Ryan and had, from childhood, the specific quality of noticing things without announcing them until she was sure. She would hold an observation for weeks, sometimes months, turn it over quietly, and then say it. Once, directly, and leave it there. He hadn't said much about the relationship over the past year. She hadn't asked. This was also something he noticed in retrospect, the way he'd been editing his own experience when he talked to her, filing the uncomfortable parts under its complicated and presenting only the version that didn't require explanation. In October, 5 months into therapy, she suggested coffee. They met at a place near her apartment on a Saturday afternoon. Small, warm, the kind of place where the tables are close enough that you half lower your voice without deciding to. Ryan had been talking for a while. Sleeping better. Feeling more like himself. Reconnecting with Marcus and John. He'd had dinner with them twice in the past month, which was more than the previous year combined. Noticing things in therapy that he'd been filing away for a long time. He was describing a session when he noticed Sophia was holding her coffee cup with both hands, warming them, not quite looking at him. "Can I say something?" "Yeah. And it's okay if it's wrong." "Sure. I've been watching the two of you for a while, at holidays and, you know, the times we've all been in the same room." She paused, looked at her cup. "And I've noticed something. When you seem worse, when you seem tired or kind of small or like you're, I don't know, disappearing a little. She seems fine, present, comfortable." Ryan didn't speak. "But when you're actually good, when you have energy, when you seem like yourself, something shifts with her. She gets less. I don't know what I mean exactly. Less settled. Like the room has the wrong amount of air." A pause. Outside, a car passed. "I've been trying to figure out if that makes me a terrible person for noticing." "It doesn't. I don't know what it means. I just notice it. Every time. I've been noticing it too." Sophia had described the counter without the word. "When you're good, she gets less." He had known immediately what she meant. He had been tracking it for 2 months. Someone else had seen it from outside and described the same shape, without knowing he had a name for it, without knowing he'd been watching it too. He said, "I've been noticing it too." He didn't say, "I called it the counter. I have 17 data points. I've been afraid I was inventing it." He didn't need to. At his next session with Dr. Cross, Ryan didn't bring up the conversation with Sophia right away. He brought up the sleep, the way it had stabilized. The thing about the forensic impulse, how recognizing it had changed something, made him slightly slower to default to self-blame. Dr. Cross listened with the particular attention of someone who was tracking more than the content of what was being said. He was 58, with gray at his temples, and the unhurried quality of someone who had long since stopped trying to move faster than the truth. He waited until Ryan had finished. "I want to try something different this week." "Okay. Tell me what happens in the relationship in the 48 hours after a session here." "What do you mean?" "Just, what's the texture of those 48 hours? Better? Worse? The same?" Ryan looked at him. I haven't really thought about it that way." "Start noticing." That was all. Dr. Cross moved on to something else. But Ryan drove home thinking about it. And the next 48 hours after that session, he tracked. He tracked the following week too. And the week after. By week 9, he had a data set. Every therapy session that had gone well, every session where something clarified, where he left feeling more like himself, had been followed by a specific drop in the apartment, a cooler temperature, a quiet with weight. Sometimes "Anne, I've been feeling distant from you lately." Once, a comment about how he seemed different since he'd started therapy. Once, a question about whether he was sure it was helping, or whether he was just using it to avoid real work. The correlation was consistent. He brought it to the session at week 10. "I've been tracking what happens after our sessions, like you asked." What did you find? Every session that went well, where I felt clearer, more myself, there was something in the following 48 hours at home. A coolness, a specific kind of distance. It's happened 9 times now. 9 consecutive sessions. What do you make of that? I don't know. I keep thinking maybe I'm coming home differently. Carrying something from the session that she can pick up on. Like I'm bringing something into the space that upsets the balance. Maybe. A pause. Dr. Cross's pauses had a specific quality. Not empty, but expectant. Like he was waiting for the room to catch up to something that was already true. Or maybe you're the variable she needs not to change. Ryan heard the words. Let them sit. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it yet. You've just identified a consistent correlation. What does a scientist do with that? He looks for the mechanism. Come back next week. Keep tracking. The disclosure happened in week 6, before the formal tracking. But Ryan counted it anyway. He had retroactively cataloged it as data point 3. He had been telling himself he would tell her, that it was strange not to tell her, that she would want to know, would be supportive, would probably have thoughts about scheduling. He had been telling himself this for 5 weeks. On a Thursday evening, over dinner, spaghetti carbonara, which he had made, which he was good at, he said it. I've been seeing a therapist since August. I wanted you to know. He watched her face. It didn't change exactly. There was a very slight adjustment. Something around the eyes. The pause before she responded was 2 beats too long. I'm glad you felt you needed to do that without telling me. Her voice was even. Not angry. I wasn't keeping it from you. I just wanted to make sure it was going to work. I wanted to see if it was worth mentioning first. No, I understand, of course. She ate. He ate. She asked if he wanted more. He said no. Later, quieter, she set down her fork. I suppose I just didn't realize you had so much to process that I wasn't aware of. It's not about you. I know. I support you completely. I just wonder sometimes what you've been sharing. A pause. You know how private I am. She did not return to the topic, Ryan said to himself later that night. She was fine about it. She was supportive. There's nothing to track here. Over the following 48 hours, she was present. She answered questions, made meals, responded when spoken to. She did not initiate anything. Nothing that could be named. Nothing that could be held up. On Sunday, Ryan called Dr. Cross's office. I need to cancel Thursday. Something's come up. Something hadn't come up. He knew that. He said it anyway. He was sitting on the couch next to Valerie, watching a documentary she'd suggested, and somewhere under the surface of that Sunday afternoon, he filed it. Data point 3. 7 months in. Dr. Cross had been asking about the friendships. Not pushing, just asking. Whether he'd seen Marcus lately. Whether the dinners had continued. He had been declining invitations for 4 months. Not officially. Just getting busy. Just not quite having the energy. Just waiting for a time when it wouldn't feel complicated. On a Friday in November, Marcus texted him directly. We're at the Lowry tonight. John's there. Please come. I feel like I haven't seen you in a year. He went. It was 4 hours. beer and food and the low, easy energy of people who'd known each other long enough to be quiet together without it meaning anything. Marcus was finishing his dissertation. John had a new job. They asked about Ryan's students, about a kid he'd mentioned months ago who was talented but struggling. He came home at 10:30 feeling lighter than he had in months. Valerie was awake on the couch, not reading. The television wasn't on. The specific quality of her voice when he came in was not anger. It was something closer to concern. "You seem different." "I had a good evening." A pause. "I worry sometimes. I know you need your friends. I just feel so distant from you lately. Like part of you is somewhere else and I can't reach it." Her voice was quiet, genuine sounding. "I'm right here." "I know." She went to bed. He sat in the kitchen for a while. The following week she mentioned, in passing, not accusatorially, just as an observation she was sharing, that she'd been feeling a little abandoned lately. I don't know if that's the right word. Once on Tuesday, once on Thursday in the context of something else, once on Saturday when he suggested calling Marcus back. Ryan declined John's birthday dinner 3 days later. He sat at the kitchen table that night and counted. He had 22 data points now, 22 instances of a good thing followed by a corresponding escalation. A session that went well, a dinner with friends, a phone call that ran long, a morning spent grading in the campus library instead of coming home. 22 times the counter had moved. He had been a chemistry teacher for 11 years. If a student brought him a data set this consistent and asked him if it proved a hypothesis, he would have said yes. He said it to himself now, in the kitchen with the overhead light too bright. Yes, the pattern is real. I have not been imagining it. He didn't know yet what to do with a pattern that he hadn't imagined. The company gala was in early December. Ryan had attended every year for 4 years. Valerie's company. Black tie, downtown hotel, 700 people. 3 hours of watching Valerie navigate a room with the ease of someone in their natural element while he stood at the perimeter with a glass of champagne, feeling like a visible accessory. He had never told her this. This year, on a Tuesday, she mentioned it. The gala was the following Saturday. She assumed he'd arranged the time off from his after-school commitment. He coached the Science Olympiad team, which met on Saturday afternoons. He hadn't. And he had 3 parent-teacher conferences that afternoon that had already been rescheduled once. "I can't do Saturday. I have conferences until 5 and the team debrief after. I need to prepare for both." A pause. "The gala starts at 7. You'd have plenty of time." "I'd be coming from 3 hours of conferences and then the debrief. I'd be exhausted and honestly not in the right headspace for a work event." Another pause. Slightly longer. "Okay." She went quiet. Not the usual quiet, the weighted one. This was different. Something underneath it had changed registers. On Wednesday evening, she said, "I want to talk about Saturday." "Okay." "I feel like I need you to understand what this event means to my professional life. And I'm not sure you do." "I understand it's important. I'm saying I have a professional commitment that day, too." "Ryan, you're a teacher. You can reschedule parent conferences." "These are already rescheduled. 3 parents took time off work to come in." She looked at him for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had the quality of someone who had decided to say something they'd been holding. "I think you've been withdrawing from me for months, passively, in ways that are hard to name, but I feel it. And this feels like part of that pattern. And I'm worried about us." Ryan opened his mouth. "I know you have therapy. I know you've been talking to people. I know Sophia and Marcus and whoever else have their version of our relationship, and I'm scared that the version you're getting from other people is pulling you away from what we actually have." The accusations came in waves after that. For 3 hours. Things he had said in early therapy, which he had told her about before he'd stopped telling her, were held up as evidence that he had been quietly building a case against her. The friends who clearly never liked her, a coldness she had been sensing for months, the way he'd started sleeping through the night, which she'd noticed and which apparently worried her because he'd been so different since. She described everything he had been trying to do as something he was doing to her. His attending therapy, withdrawal, his dinners with Marcus and John, building alliances, his no about the gala, passive aggression, the person she loved becoming someone she didn't recognize. Ryan listened. He recognized somewhere in hour 2 what the description was. He couldn't name it yet. He just felt it. The inversion, the way his healing had been reframed as attack. He did not apologize. He went to the parent-teacher conferences on Saturday. He ran the debrief. He came home at 8:30. He stood outside the apartment door for a moment before going in. He went in. What Ryan had been living for 4 years had a structure, not a personal one. Not about Ryan specifically, not about Valerie as a person. A structural one, a description of how a certain kind of system maintains itself, documented across decades of clinical research and replicated in studies that had nothing to do with romantic relationships and everything to do with them. The research on narcissistic personality structure, Kohut's work from 1971, Kernberg's from 1975, the clinical literature on coercive control that followed, describes the narcissist's capacity for self-regulation as significantly externalized. Most adults develop over time internal mechanisms for maintaining psychological stability. The capacity to self-soothe, to locate worth from the inside rather than from the environment. The narcissistic system doesn't work this way. It requires continuous external input, validation, compliance, emotional availability, admiration, to maintain the functioning of what researchers call the false self, the structure that faces the world and insists it is whole and sufficient and untouchable. The other person in the relationship is not experienced as a separate human being with their own interior life. They are experienced, in Kohut's language, as a self-object, a function of the narcissist's own psychological regulation, a mirror that reflects worth, an idealized figure that confers value, a twin that confirms identity. When the self-object begins to withdraw, through therapy, through friendships, through a single boundary, through any movement toward themselves, the narcissist does not experience this as they're getting healthier. They experience it as dissolution, something coming apart inside without a clear cause. The escalation that follows is not punishment. It is the system's emergency response to supply loss, not cruelty. Panic. Ryan had not been the cause of Valerie's escalations. He had been the supply she required to stay stable, and every step he had taken toward himself, every session, every dinner, every "I can't make it Saturday," had been a step away from the system's fuel source. The supply had been withdrawing. The system had been responding, not deliberately, with the desperation of something that doesn't know how to survive any other way. The following Thursday, Ryan sat across from Dr. Cross in the office on Franklin Avenue. He had held. He hadn't called to apologize after the gala confrontation, hadn't texted to check in, hadn't canceled the session. He sat in the chair and described the 5 days since. The cold, the way Valerie had, twice, mentioned needing to figure out where they stood. The way he'd gone to work, graded papers, eaten dinner, gone to bed, and woken up the next day without having apologized for something he hadn't done wrong. He was shaken, but he was holding. Dr. Cross let him talk. When he was done, "Something's different today." "What do you mean?" "You came in here with 22 data points. You described the biggest escalation you've been through, and you didn't apologize to make it stop." "Not yet." "But you're here. That's different." A pause. I want to tell you something. What you've been tracking, the consistent correlation between your progress and the escalations. It has a name in behavioral psychology. Would you like to hear it? Yeah. It's called an extinction burst. Ryan looked at him. Operant conditioning. Skinner, 1938. When a behavior that has consistently been reinforced is suddenly placed on extinction, when the reinforcement stops, the behavior doesn't simply stop. It escalates. More frequently, more intensely, more desperately. Before it can extinguish, it bursts. A beat. The behaviors that have been working on you. The cold distance after good sessions. The vulnerability after you came home from dinner with your friends. The accusations Saturday night, they've been working because you've been reinforcing them. Every time you apologized, every time you canceled a session, every time you declined an invitation to make up for going, you reinforced the behavior. That was how the cycle maintained itself. And when you started therapy, when you went to dinner, when you said no about the gala, you stopped reinforcing. You withdrew the fuel. And the system did what systems do when they lose their fuel. It escalated. It escalated. A pause. The room was quiet. So, the worse it gets, the more it proves the old system is losing its grip. Not that you're doing something wrong. I need you to understand that those are opposite things. They look identical from the inside. The worse it gets after you make a healthy choice, the easier it is to conclude that the healthy choice is the problem. It isn't. The healthy choice is the thing the system cannot afford to have you make. The escalation is the evidence, not the accusation. Ryan sat there for a long time. The counter had a name. 1938. Documented in rats and pigeons, and replicated in humans across 80 years of behavioral research. Every escalation had been the system trying to restore what it ran on. Every good session that cost him. Every dinner that produced a week of "I've been feeling abandoned." Every data point, the counter moving against him, had been proof. Not that he was doing something wrong, that he had stopped doing something the system required. So the worse it got, the more it proved you'd stopped feeding it. Dr. Cross leaned forward slightly. The question now is not whether the pattern is real. You have 22 data points. The question is, will you hold your ground through the burst? Because the burst will peak. The arc is consistent. Escalation, peak, exhaustion, subsidence. What happens at the peak is up to you. If you return to compliance at the peak, you don't just restore the old cycle, you make it harder to interrupt the next time because the escalation was reinforced. If you hold through the peak, he left the sentence open. Ryan knew how it ended. There are words for what you've been describing. The coercive control, the supply withdrawal response, the way the cycle maintains itself through your compliance. Some of what we've talked about meets the clinical definition of abuse. I say that not to label her, but to orient you. You're not crazy. You've been tracking a real system. And you've been living inside it for 4 years without a map. Now you have a map. Carl Jung, writing decades before Skinner's data existed, uncovered the mechanism from the inside of the psyche rather than the outside. Not through behavioral observation, through the direct examination of how a certain kind of psychological architecture organizes itself and what happens when that architecture begins to fail. In his collected works, Volume 8, he described what he called the principle of psychic compensation. The unconscious always constellates what the conscious attitude excludes. The more one-sided the conscious position, the more insistently the persona claims to be whole and sufficient and untouchable, the more the unconscious will produce its direct opposite and with proportional force. The narcissist's conscious attitude is one of absolute sufficiency, control, superiority, invulnerability. The persona is organized entirely around the presentation of a self that requires nothing, that is complete, unthreatened, beyond need. The shadow, which carries everything that persona excludes, holds the full weight of what the false self cannot acknowledge: the dependency, the panic, the void, the absolute need for the other's compliance to keep the system running. For most people, Jung's individuation process, the gradual, painful work of becoming a distinct and integrated self, confronting the shadow rather than projecting it, is the work of a lifetime. It is not easy, but it is available. For the narcissist, it is structurally unavailable. Individuation requires confronting the shadow, sitting with what it holds, integrating what it carries. But the narcissist's persona inflation is sustained precisely by not examining that territory. The shadow cannot be touched without the persona collapsing. And so the narcissist cannot individuate. But more than that, the narcissist cannot tolerate the individuation of the person they depend on. In Volume 7, Jung described individuation as the process by which individual beings are formed and differentiated, the development of the psychological individual as a being distinct from the general collective psychology, a separate, indivisible whole. For Valerie, whose psychological architecture had been organized around Ryan's non-distinctness, his compliance, his availability, his permeability, Ryan's individuation was not simply unwelcome. It was the single most threatening development conceivable. The dismantling of the supply structure, the emergence of a self that could say no, that had a therapist, that ate dinner with friends on a Friday and came home lighter. The escalation was not chosen. It was not punishment or strategy or deliberate cruelty. It was the shadow compensating for the collapse of the persona's control, erupting with increasing force in direct response to what it registered as its own annihilation. The more Ryan individuated, the more whole he became, the harder the shadow of the false self pushed back. Jung wrote about this mechanism 80 years before Ryan sat in a Minneapolis apartment running correlations and wondering why getting better was costing him so much. The behavior was the same. The psychic structure behind it was the same. The human shadow, Jung observed, does not update quickly. Ryan was not the variable that needed correcting. He was the variable the system could not afford to have change. Getting better was not the problem. Getting better was the one thing the system had always depended on him not to do. The biggest escalation came 4 days after the gala Saturday. It lasted 2 days. Valerie told him she wasn't sure the relationship was working anymore. She told him she had been invisible to him for months. She mentioned again the things he had shared in therapy. Said twice that she felt violated by having her private life discussed with a stranger. She said she thought the people he'd been spending time with had been influencing him against her. She said she felt like she was losing him to a version of himself that didn't have room for her. Her voice was not raised throughout any of this. That specific evenness, controlled, calibrated, the same register she had used to say, "I support you completely," the same register she had used to say, "I suppose I didn't realize you had so much to process that I wasn't aware of." The voice that had always made Ryan feel irrational for having doubts. He sat with it. He did not apologize. He said, "I hear that you're in pain. I'm not going to cancel Thursday." She went quiet. He went to Thursday. He came home to a cold apartment and ate dinner alone and went to bed. Turned to her, she told him she'd been thinking and felt their communication had broken down completely. She asked if they could talk about how to repair it. Her voice was softer now. A different register. The warmth returning after cold. The pivot that had always, before, produced relief in him. The door reopening. The sense that the crisis had passed and could be filed as resolved. The permission to stop holding. He said, "I think we need some space." Day 3. A text. She was worried about him. She wanted to make sure he was okay. She was not trying to pressure him, just checking in. He didn't respond. Day 4. She was staying with a colleague from work for a few days. She needed some time. She hoped he understood. She said she hoped they could figure out how to move forward. Ryan read the message twice. Put his phone face down on the kitchen table. He sat in the empty apartment for a long time. No overhead light. Just the city through the window, the street sounds, the specific silence of a space that had been tense for 4 years and was, for the first time, not. He'd been waiting for the panic. The pullback toward compliance, the need to fix it, the familiar forensic search for what he'd done wrong and how to undo it. It came. Briefly, like a wave that turned out to be smaller than he'd been afraid of. And then it receded. He sat there in the quiet of his own apartment and let himself feel the shape of what was happening. The burst was at its peak. He knew that now. Skinner had documented it in 1938. The arc was consistent. He was inside the arc, and the arc was behaving exactly as documented. He had not moved toward it. The counter had moved toward him for the first time in 4 years. He had not moved toward it. Minneapolis, late October. The relationship had ended in January, not with a single conversation, but with the accumulation of silences and the slow withdrawal of the architecture that had been holding it in place. There was a final conversation. He didn't say much. She said more. He listened, nodded, said, "I know." He was still in therapy. Still sleeping. Dinner with Marcus and John had become a standing Thursday thing, which they called the Thursday thing, which required no justification or planning ahead. Sophia had texted him on a Wednesday. "How are you actually doing?" He'd replied, "Better than I knew was possible." She'd sent back a single period, which was how she said she understood. On an October afternoon, he was in his classroom during planning period, 4th period free, 32 student papers on stoichiometry that needed grading, afternoon light coming through the windows at the low angle it only reached in October, the kind that made the whiteboard glow and the room feel like it belonged to a different season. He was halfway through the 3rd paper when he thought of something Valerie had said, very early in the relationship. Before the pattern had installed itself, before he'd known there was a pattern to notice, she'd said, "You're different when things are going well for you." He had not understood it as a problem statement at the time. He'd taken it as an observation, as something tender. He understood it now. It was a problem statement. He was different when things were going well for him. He became more himself, more present, more distinct. He took up more of his own space. That had always been the point. The counter had stopped, not because he had found the right way to get better without triggering it. There was no right way. There had never been a right way. It had stopped because he had stopped providing the signal it was measuring. The apartment was quiet now. He was not in it. He was in his classroom in October with papers to grade and afternoon light coming through the window, and something that had been running constantly for 3.5 years, that low background register of cost, the perpetual toll that getting better had been charging, had gone silent. He hadn't noticed the silence until now. He let himself notice it. The 3rd paper had a mistake in the molar ratio. An easy fix. An honest mistake, the kind that a good teacher marks and explains and does not hold. He picked up his pen. He wrote, "Good thinking here. Check the ratio. You've got the framework right. Outside, Minneapolis in October, the trees going, the particular light of a season that doesn't last. Inside, a man at a desk, grading papers, sleeping through the night. Eating dinner with his friends on Thursdays, getting better, quietly, consistently, without apology, without cost. The counter had stopped. He had not.